Hello everyone, and welcome to Revisiting Archive, the channel where we explore the fascinating history of the world. This is the fifth video in our series on Portuguese history, and today we are going to delve into Portugal's role in World War I, focusing on the heroic efforts of the Portuguese Expeditionary Corps on the Western Front. Now, let's dive into the history of Portugal, a country that has a rich and diverse past, shaped by many civilizations and cultures. Do you know how it all started? Do you know how a small corner of the Iberian Peninsula became a powerful and influential nation that explored and colonized the world? Do you know how the ancient Romans shaped the culture, language, and identity of the Portuguese people? If you're curious about these questions, then you should watch our previous videos, where we talked about the Roman conquest, the birth of Lusitania, and the enduring influence of Roman culture in Portugal, the Lusitanian War, led by the legendary Viriatus as they resisted Roman domination in a quest for freedom, the assassination of King Carlos and the ascension of King Manuel II, and the monarchy in turmoil and the 1910 revolution, and how a bullet sparked a republic. But today, we are going to focus on a more recent and global episode of Portuguese history that occurred in the early 20th century, when Portugal participated in the First World War, the Great War that involved most of the countries of the world and resulted in millions of deaths and injuries. Portugal's involvement in World War I was not a simple or straightforward decision, but rather the outcome of a complex and contradictory situation that had its roots in the 19th century when Portugal faced many challenges and changes, such as the loss of its colonial empire, the industrialization and the urbanization of its society, the emergence of new ideologies and movements, and the interference of foreign powers. Portugal had declared its neutrality at the outbreak of the war in 1914, but it soon found itself in a difficult position due to its historical alliance with Britain, its oldest and most important ally, and its colonial disputes with Germany, its main rival in Africa. Portugal also had internal divisions and conflicts between the monarchy and the republic, and between the interventionists and the pacifists. Portugal's neutrality ended in 1916, when the Portuguese government seized a number of German merchant ships that were anchored in Lisbon as a gesture of solidarity with Britain. This provoked the German government to declare war on Portugal, and also triggered the entry of Portugal into the war on the side of the Allies. Portugal's participation in the war was mainly motivated by its desire to secure its colonial possessions in Africa, especially Angola and Mozambique, where it faced the threat of German invasion. Portugal also hoped to gain international recognition and prestige, and to modernize and reform its country by joining the war effort. Portugal's contribution to the war was mainly in two fronts, the African front and the European front. On the African front, Portugal sent troops to defend its colonies from the German attacks and to cooperate with the British and French forces. On the European front, Portugal sent an expeditionary force of about 55,000 men to fight alongside the British and French armies on the Western Front, in France and Belgium. The Portuguese Expeditionary Corps, or CEP, was the most important and significant Portuguese military force in World War I. It was composed of two infantry divisions and support units, and was commanded by General Fernando Tamangini de Abreu. The CEP arrived in France in February 1917 and was assigned to the British First Army under the command of General Henry Horn. The CEP faced many difficulties and challenges, both before and during its deployment on the Western Front. It had to overcome the lack of training, equipment and supplies, the harsh weather and living conditions, the language and culture barriers, and the low morale and discipline. It also had to deal with the mistrust and prejudice of the British and French commanders, who doubted the capabilities and reliability of the Portuguese soldiers and often treated them as second-class allies. The CEP also faced the horrors and hardships of trench warfare, the new and deadly form of warfare that characterized the First World War. The CEP had to endure the constant shelling, bombing, sniping, and gas attacks, the diseases, infections, and injuries, and the fear, boredom, and despair. The CEP also had to engage in several battles and skirmishes against the German army that tested its courage and resilience. The most tragic and traumatic battle for the CEP was the Battle of the Lys, also known as the Fourth Battle of Ypres, that took place in April 1918. During the German Spring Offensive, a massive and desperate attempt by the Germans to break through the Allied lines and win the war. The CEP was stationed in a sector of the front near the Lys River in Flanders and was ordered to hold its position at all costs, despite being outnumbered and outgunned by the German forces. The CEP fought bravely and heroically, but was unable to stop the German advance, and suffered heavy casualties and losses. The CEP was virtually destroyed as a fighting unit, and many of its soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. The battle after this was a devastating blow for the CEP, and also for the Portuguese nation that mourned the sacrifice and the suffering of its sons. The CEP was never reassembled or reinforced after the Battle of the Lys, and its remaining elements were incorporated into the British and French units until the end of the war. The CEP was officially disbanded in July 1919, and its survivors returned to Portugal, where they received a cold and indifferent welcome, and faced the indifference and the ignorance of the public opinion that had little or no knowledge of the deeds and their ordeal. The CEP was the most visible and the most tragic expression of Portugal's role in World War I, but it was not the only one. Portugal also contributed to the war in other ways, such as by providing naval support, medical assistance, and diplomatic cooperation. Portugal also suffered the consequences of the war, such as the economic and social crisis, the political and religious conflicts, and the military coups. Portugal's role in World War I was a complex and contradictory experience that had both positive and negative aspects, and both short-term and long-term impacts. On the other hand, Portugal gained international recognition and respect and secured its colonial empire by participating in the war. On the other hand, Portugal paid a high price in human and material resources and faced many problems and challenges by participating in the war. Portugal's role in World War I was also a forgotten and neglected chapter of history that was overshadowed by the events and changes that followed the war, such as the rise of the dictatorship, the colonial wars, and the democratic transition. Portugal's role in World War I was also a heroic and inspiring chapter of its history that deserves to be remembered and honored by the Portuguese people and by the world. That's all for today's video. I hope you learned something new and interesting about Portugal's role in World War I and the Portuguese Expeditionary Corps on the Western Front. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Thank you for watching, and as always, keep revisiting the archive.